December 11th, 1978, a cold wind blows across JFK International Airport. In the shadow of the cargo terminals, a crime of the century begins. This is the Mastermind Dossier investigation into the infamous Lufthansa heist. $6 million in cash and jewels vanished into the New York night. The story begins in the dark corners of Robert's Lounge in Queens. James Jimmy, the Gent Burke held court here, a legend in the underworld. Burke was a Lucchese family associate, brilliant, ruthless, and feared by everyone. His crew was a motley collection of hijackers, thieves, and cold-blooded killers. But the key to the vault was a desperate gambling addict named Louis Werner. Werner worked at the airport, but owed thousands to the wrong people. To save his own life, he offered up his employer, Lufthansa Cargo. He told the mob about a monthly shipment of untraceable American currency. The plan was set into motion, involving a black Ford Econoline van. Burke orchestrated the timeline, aiming for a weekend when the vault was full. The crew gathered their tools, ski masks, gloves, and long-barreled pistols. The date was chosen, December 11th, 3 o'clock in the morning. The black van crept up to the perimeter fence of the cargo terminal. Bolt cutters snapped the lock on the gate, opening the path to millions. The van rolled silently across the tarmac, blending into the airport operations. The rear doors flew open, and armed men spilled out into the night. They moved fast, grabbing the first employee they saw on the loading dock. Resistance was met with immediate brutality. A pistol whip silenced a protest. The workers were rounded up and forced into the lunch room at gunpoint. One gunman stood watch, telling them to keep their eyes on the floor. Kerry Whalen, a senior agent, walked down the corridor, unaware of the invasion. He turned a corner and froze, staring down the barrel of a .45. Whalen was shoved against the wall, the cold steel pressed to his neck. They took his wallet, threatening his family if he didn't cooperate. They demanded the keys to the high-value vault, the heart of the heist. Whalen was marched to the vault room, the gun never leaving his back. They reached the heavy double doors that guarded the weekend shipment. The key slid into the lock, the only sound in the tense silence. With a mechanical click, the first layer of security was breached. They entered the outer cage, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But the inner vault door remained, a massive slab of steel. They dragged another employee, Rolf Weddell, to the front of the group. Weddell knew the combination. He dialed it with trembling fingers. The handle turned, the heavy gears disengaging with a groan. The door swung open, revealing the holy grail of cargo theft. Inside sat pallets of currency parcels, fresh from the Federal Reserve. Even the thieves were stunned by the sheer volume of the cash. They didn't waste a second, grabbing the first 40-pound parcel. A human chain formed, passing the wealth from the vault to the van. Parcel after parcel was thrown into the back of the Ford Econoline. They found burlap sacks heavy with gold coins and jewelry. The weight was immense, but greed gave them superhuman strength. The van's suspension groaned, sinking lower with every $1 million. Frank James Burke, Jimmy's son, directed the loading with ruthless efficiency. Tommy DeSimone, a psychopath, paced nervously, itching for violence. They checked the manifest, realizing they were taking more than expected. The pile of cash in the van grew until it nearly touched the roof. They grabbed boxes of uncut diamonds and jewelry as a bonus. The vault shelves were stripped bare, leaving only dust outlines. Breathing heavily in the cold air, the crew finished the job. The rear doors were slammed shut, sealing the fortune inside. The driver jumped in, turning the key to start the heavy vehicle. The engine roared to life, struggling slightly under the payload. The thieves piled in, sitting on top of $6 million. The van pulled away slowly, the tires protesting the weight. Inside, the hostages remained on the floor, terrified to move. One masked man leaned back in, putting a finger to his lips. He told them not to move until 4:30 a.m., or they would die. The van slipped through the broken gate, leaving the airport behind. They hit the Belt Parkway, disappearing into the New York night. A police cruiser passed them in the opposite direction, oblivious. Inside the van, the masks came off, revealing faces flush with adrenaline. Tommy DeSimone laughed maniacally, clutching a bundle of bills. They arrived at a safe garage in Brooklyn, their sanctuary. The garage door rattled shut, hiding the crime of the century. Jimmy Burke was waiting for them, calm, smoking a cigarette. When they opened the back, even Jimmy was stunned by the haul. They unloaded the money onto a table, a sea of green and gold. The counting began, a process that would take hours. Parnell Stax Edwards, the driver, looked at the empty van. Jimmy handed Stax a wad of cash and gave him a specific order. He ordered Stax to drive the van to New Jersey and crush it. Stax nodded, taking the keys, thinking about his girlfriend. The loot was divided into shares, though Jimmy took the lion's share. Cars were loaded with money to be distributed to safe houses. The sun rose over New York, waking up a city that was now poorer. By morning, the headlines screamed about the daring heist at JFK. Police swarmed the airport, confused and humiliated. The FBI arrived, taking jurisdiction over the massive interstate theft. They found the cut chain, the only physical sign of entry. Meanwhile, Stax Edwards was driving the getaway van, exhausted. Instead of New Jersey, he parked the van in Canarsie, Brooklyn. He walked away, deciding to visit his girlfriend instead of the junkyard. Stax sat on a couch, getting high, forgetting the urgency. The black van sat on the street, a smoking gun in plain sight. 2 days later, a police patrol car drove slowly past the vehicle. The officer ran the plates, realizing it was the most wanted vehicle. Within minutes, the street was swarming with cops and agents. Forensics teams descended on the van, dusting every inch. They lifted a clear fingerprint from the steering wheel. They found mud from the airport and a distinct boot print. Jimmy Burke watched the news report, his face turning into a mask of rage. He realized the van hadn't been destroyed. A loose end remained. The fingerprint came back to Parnell Stax Edwards. Police raided Stax's apartment, but he was already gone. Stax was hiding out, knowing he had made a fatal mistake. Jimmy Burke made a call, his voice low and deadly. Tommy DeSimone listened to the order, checking his gun. The order was given: eliminate the loose end. Stax sat in a chair, watching television, waiting for the heat to die down. Tommy DeSimone and another associate entered the room quietly. Stax looked up, seeing his friends, thinking he was safe. Tommy raised the gun with a silencer, his face devoid of mercy. A suppressed shot echoed in the small room. Stax slumped in the chair, the first casualty of the aftermath. Jimmy Burke sat in his car, watching the rain, paranoia growing. He realized that everyone involved was a potential witness. The crew who had celebrated days ago were now walking targets. Marty Krugman, who tipped them off, started demanding his cut. Jimmy looked at Marty with dead eyes, deciding his fate. Marty got into a car with Jimmy, thinking he was getting paid. The car drove away, and Marty Krugman was never seen again. The FBI ramped up the pressure, following Jimmy everywhere. Henry Hill, an associate, started seeing unmarked cars everywhere. The sound of helicopters became the soundtrack of their lives. Jimmy sat alone with his millions, trusting no one. A loaded gun sat next to the money stacks. Richard Eaton, a con man who skimmed money, tried to talk his way out. Days later, a frozen meat truck was found abandoned. Inside, a body hung stiff on a meat hook, frozen solid. Police examined the grim discovery, another link to the heist. Fear of Jimmy Burke spread through the underworld like a virus. Some crew members started spending money on flashy cars and furs. Jimmy grabbed them, warning them that spending attracted the cops. A pink Cadillac purchased with stolen cash sat as a beacon for the FBI. Teresa Ferrara, a mistress connected to the crew, made a nervous call. She walked out of a diner and vanished into thin air. Months later, a dismembered body washed up on a Jersey shore. Tommy DeSimone felt untouchable, dreaming of being made. Tommy dressed in his finest suit for a ceremony to become a made man. He got into a car with senior mobsters, smiling, expecting a promotion. The car drove to an empty house in the suburbs. The door closed behind him, and Tommy DeSimone met his end. Jimmy Burke slammed the phone down, crying for the only person he liked. His grief turned to cold resolve No one else would survive. Joe Manry was called to a meeting he didn't want to attend. A car was found parked under a bridge in Queens. Two bodies were found in the front seat, executed at close range. Police photos captured the carnage. The cleanup continued. Henry Hill stirred sauce in his kitchen, waiting for the hammer to drop. He checked the sky for helicopters, fueled by cocaine and fear. Henry was dealing drugs, breaking the mob's #1 rule. Jimmy looked at Henry, wondering if he was the next liability. The FBI wiretaps were spinning, catching snippets of the chaos. Agents sat in cramped vans, listening to hours of static and silence. They watched Henry Hill, waiting for him to make a fatal mistake. Henry drove through the suburbs, constantly checking for the tail. Paranoid and addicted, Henry hid drugs all over his house. Jimmy Burke sat in diners, plotting the removal of the next witness. Paolo Licastri, the Gambino family liaison, was the next target. A burning trash heap was discovered in a desolate Brooklyn lot. Firefighters extinguished the flames, revealing the charred remains of a man. Licastri was identified, sending a message to the other families. Louis Werner, the inside man, finally cracked under FBI pressure. He pointed the finger at the crew, giving the feds the names. But most of the names Werner gave were already dead. The heist crew was filling up the cemeteries of New York. Henry continued his drug operation, desperate for cash and a high. Then, the Nassau County Narcotics Task Force swarmed his driveway. Henry was dragged from his car, screaming, his world collapsing. He sat in a holding cell, knowing the mob rules about drug dealers. Jimmy Burke heard about the arrest and knew Henry was a liability. Jimmy ordered the hit on his oldest friend, Henry Hill. Henry's wife, Karen, received a call, sensing the danger in the tone. The FBI played a surveillance tape for Henry in the interrogation room. Henry heard Jimmy discussing his murder, the betrayal cutting deep. He looked at the agents and made the decision to flip. Henry signed his life away, entering the witness protection program. He was whisked away to a safe house, leaving his old life behind. Police finally moved in on Jimmy Burke, arresting the gent. He walked the perp walk, staring down the cameras with cold defiance. The trial was a media circus, with Henry as the star witness. Henry pointed at his former boss, detailing the murders and the heist. Jimmy stared back, his eyes promising a death that he couldn't deliver. The jury listened to the tale of greed, blood, and betrayal. The gavel came down, sealing the fate of the Lucchese associate. Jimmy stood to hear the verdict, his face a mask of stone. Headlines proclaimed the end of an era. Jimmy the Gent guilty. He was sentenced to life, walking into the cage he would never leave. But the investigation wasn't over. The money was still missing. Agents dug up backyards and basements, searching for the cash. Metal detectors swept over acres of land in Queens. Safes were cracked open only to reveal dust and cobwebs. Walls were torn down, but the $6 million was gone. Angelo Seep, a crew member, was released from prison years later. Seep bragged that he knew where the money was hidden. A week later, a gunman entered his apartment in the morning. Seep was found dead, his secret dying with him. Jimmy Burke withered away in prison, dying of cancer in 1996. He took the location of the loot to his grave. Henry Hill lived out his days in hiding, looking over his shoulder. He traded lobster and crime for egg noodles and ketchup. The story became a legend, immortalized in the movie Goodfellas. But the reality was far grimmer than the Hollywood version. The body count of the Lufthansa heist rivals a war zone. The empty vault remains a symbol of the ultimate inside job. Occasionally, a single gold coin from the heist surfaces. Traces of the loot appear in pawn shops, but the mountain is gone. The black van rusted away in an evidence lot, a forgotten relic. The FBI case file remains one of the thickest in history. Did Jimmy bury it? Did the mob bosses take it? Some say the Gambino family took the lion's share as tribute. Others believe it was laundered into legitimate businesses. JFK Airport bustles today, the ghosts of 1978 long gone. Security is tighter now, fueled by the lessons of the past. The doors are stronger, the alarms louder. But the allure of the big score never truly fades. The money brought nothing but death to those who touched it. Within 2 years, 10 people directly involved were murdered. Friends killed friends to keep a secret that destroyed them all. Henry Hill survived by betraying the code he once lived by. Jimmy Burke remains the personification of ruthless greed. The truth was beaten, shot, and strangled out of existence. The blood map of the heist covers Brooklyn, Queens, and Jersey. $6 million, worth $20 million today, vanished. The booths at Robert's Lounge are empty now. The lounge itself is long gone, a relic of a violent past. Only the shell casings remain as testimony. We close the file on the Lufthansa heist, a tragedy of greed. Mastermind Dossier investigations continue. Did crime pay? For the dead, the answer is silence. Their faces stare back from the archives of criminal history. The planes take off, carrying cargo to the world, safe for now. Subscribe to uncover more secrets of the underworld. The search for the truth never truly ends. In the shadows, the mastermind is always watching. The darkness claims them all in the end. Who took the money? The route to the junkyard that was never taken. The badge eventually triumphed over the gun. Justice was served, but the money was the ultimate fugitive. Jimmy spent the rest of his life in a concrete box. The diamonds were never recovered, lost to time. Cryptic notes and dead ends are all that remain. Investigators retired without closing the final chapter. It started with a dream of being a gangster. It ended with the nightmare of being a rat. The slam of the cell door was the final punctuation.